Welcome to Owlkids Books panel on picture books that explore social emotional learning. I'm Jennifer Stokes, editorial director, and I am very pleased to be moderating this discussion. Owlkids gratefully acknowledges that our office in Toronto is located on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Chippewa, the Wendat, the Anishinaabe, and the Haudenosaunee peoples. We also acknowledge that the land Toronto sits on is covered by Treaty 13, known as the Toronto Purchase, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit and the Williams Treaties, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. As publishers of children's books and magazines, we take seriously our responsibility to educate our audiences about the history and legacy of colonialism and its impact on Indigenous peoples, and we are dedicated to working toward a just and equitable future. So let me introduce our panel and their books. First up is Loretta Garbutt, who is a voice actor who has, hold on a second, I just got my, she's a voice actor who has voiced animated cartoons such as Madeline, Babar, and Max and Ruby. While working at Mabel's Fables bookstore in Toronto, she fell in love with picture books and started writing them herself. Her first, A Stopwatch from Grandpa, was published in 2020, and this was followed by And JJ Slept in 2022. Loretta's new book, Jeffrey Loves Blue, is illustrated by Lily Snowden Fine. It's about a little boy who is very attached to the color blue. He wears blue socks, blue underwear, a blue hat, and of course, blue jeans. At painting class, he paints only in blue. But when his classmate, Kaiko, wants to use the blue paint, Jeffrey will have to try a different color. With some gentle coaxing, the narrator helps Jeffrey to navigate his emotions, encouraging him to consider Keiko's feelings and to find the courage to try something new while also doing something nice for a friend. Our next panelist, Laura Alary, says that she writes stories that make us bigger on the inside. By that, she means that her books make you think, wonder, and ask big questions. All her books aim to stretch minds and hearts. She is the author of What Grew in Larry's Garden, Sun in My Tummy, and The Astronomer Who Questioned Everything, among other titles. In All the Faces of Me, illustrated by Selene Pereira, hearts and minds are definitely stretched. It's about a little girl who doesn't like the fact that the nesting dolls that rest on her Nana's shelf are all the same. White frills, rosy cheeks, and 6 perfect smiles. She herself has many different faces for all of her very different emotions. So she decides to get out her markers and give each doll its own face. Her Nana is furious until she comes to understand and appreciate where her granddaughter is coming from. Today, we'll be discussing how these 2 picture books explore social emotional learning. We will have a few minutes at the end for questions, so please type them into the Q&A area accessible at the bottom of your screen. If you just want to enthusiastically support something being said, feel free to use the chat function, also at the bottom of your screen. We will be monitoring both, and we'll take a few minutes towards the end of our time to answer your questions. So let's begin. Panelists, you can turn on your cameras.
Hello.
Hi there.
Hi.
Hi, Jennifer.
Good to see everyone.
Thanks for joining us. I'm going to start off with the first question for you. I'm wondering if each of you can talk a little bit about why you wrote your book. What compelled you to share this particular story in a picture book form? And Laura, I'll start with you.
Sure. Well, All the Faces of Me is a book that I tried to write for a long time, unsuccessfully. So it started for me when my children were very young, and one of them in particular had just really big, really intense feelings. And I could see how hard it was for her to be swept up in these emotional storms. And sometimes she would say things, you know, she'd have a moment and then she would say something like, I don't like sad me, or I wish angry me would go away. And I just wanted to say to her, I love all of you. And I know it's hard to hold all of these different feelings and these different parts of you together, but I hope that my love will someday make it possible for you to do that too. So I tried to write a story that would convey this, and it was about a little girl who struggled with big feelings, She connected her moods to color, and then she used art to try to integrate them, but it never worked. No matter how many times I tried, I couldn't seem to find an image that worked. So I just put it away. And then during the pandemic, the daughter of a friend did something really interesting. Someone had given her just a plain set of wooden nesting dolls. It was meant to be a craft project. And one day she got them out and she painted them all as emojis. She gave assigned a different emotion to each doll. And she explained to her mom that the dolls represented her very mixed feelings about the pandemic. She said sometimes she was actually happy because life was a little bit slower and she had more time to spend with her mom and dad. Sometimes she was scared about getting sick, or somebody she loved getting sick. Some days she was, I shouldn't say some days, within a given day, she might be angry or frustrated because she was missing out on important things. But then she took the largest doll and she said to her mother, "But it's okay because the mama holds them all." And I heard this story and I thought, that's the image I've been waiting for. It's just such a beautiful way of thinking about or construing this kind of love that holds, that's big enough to hold everything, whether that comes from within or whether it comes from outside us. So with that inspiration in mind and kind of all of the stuff that I'd already thought about, I thought, okay, I'm going to go back to this story, and it became All the Faces of Me.
And I loved the story from the moment I read it. When you first submitted it to us, we were pretty excited. How about you, Loretta? Like, why did you write your story?
Yeah, I mean, just to Laura, you never know what's going to unleash or unlock an idea,
Yeah.
right? Like we sit with these ideas, they just sit there, and then you go, how do I say this? How does it not look, how does it look genuine? And then all of a sudden, something like that sparks it. And you can't ignore that spark. Like you have to go with it. Because if you fall asleep, you won't remember it in the morning. Jeffrey Loves Blue began with a conversation. I was at a wonderful writing retreat in Nova Scotia with some friends, and we were sitting around talking about children on the spectrum, neurodiverse children, and their challenges with language. So I was telling them about my nephew, Jeff, who is on the spectrum. He calls himself autistic. He loves to call himself autistic. And I told them how his mom is so patient in her conversation and how she teases out a response for him. And that evening, Jeffrey Loves Blue just kind of poured out. It just kind of happened, and it poured out completely in a conversation. So that night I wrote 2 more stories over the next couple of days. Jeffrey's birthday outing, Jeffrey's restaurant. But I felt it was also perfect for a picture book format because the 32 pages are the right amount of time to address a problem. It gives Jeffrey the right amount of time to process. It gives his mother the right amount of time to, find the areas where she can discuss safely with him. And like I said, gives Jeffrey time to process, what he needs to process, how to make that decision. The words that a picture book, the pictures accompany a picture book really lend themselves to the conversation, because you can actually see physically how Jeffrey reacts. And I just felt that was just a lovely pairing.
I just love that it's based on someone that you love so much and that you're so close to, and that I know that you've shared the story with him, and I just think it's such a lovely thing.
Yeah, it's great. He keeps coming up with new titles like Jeffrey Loves Sushi.
That's a good one. I like that one.
So I was going to ask you that, Loretta, whether or not you'd shared it, but what was the response?
Yeah,
Jeffrey's
Jeff
response.
didn't say a lot. He just keeps giving me titles. He's 25. He's quite able as a child who's neurodiverse. He can read a book about sharks and explain absolutely everything from beginning to end, but he can't apply it to anything. But he thought it was really cool. He gave me the thumbs up. So, and his mom was, in tears. So it's all great.
It's lovely.
Yeah.
Okay, so on to the next question. Since the topic of this panel is social emotional learning, I'd really like to lean into that theme a bit. Social emotional learning, or SEL, is all about self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship skills. And Loretta, back to Jeffrey Loves Blue. Jeffrey, the character in the story, is working really hard on all of those skills. And in the story, Jeffrey fixates on certain likes and dislikes, and readers learn that something that seems simple for some can be very complicated for others. And I was wondering if you could talk a bit about how Jeffrey's caregiver provides choice and time and space to help Jeffrey process his emotions.
Yeah, sure. This is a great question, Jennifer. So I hope you don't mind if I've made some notes.
Oh, no, please.
Throughout Jeffrey Loves Blue, Mom or the caregiver gives Jeffrey gentle nudges and encouragement all the time when discussing the choice that he has to make. She helps him understand himself by reminding him about something he'd done in the past that he really felt good about, such as, remember, a bit of white is okay if it's with blue. So basically, she's telling him, you'll be okay, you've done this, you can handle it. Mom also steps aside to give Jeffrey time to process everything. She's always reassuring and supportive. She doesn't take for granted that Jeffrey will just get it, that he'll just get what needs to be done. In the first part of the story, Mom and Jeffrey chat about the beauty of the color blue. Sometimes it's dark like the ocean, says Mom. So this is kind of a comfortable conversation, and it gives Mom time to slide into the important question of, sometimes you have to try a different color, right? So it kind of feels gentle, it feels natural. And throughout the story, Jeffrey is given the opportunity to rely on himself to make the decision in the end. The solution is revealed to the reader as it's revealed to Jeffrey himself.
Oh, good answer.
Yeah, thanks.
Laura, the protagonist of your story is incredibly self-aware. She understands intrinsically that one person has many different faces. However, her self-management skills need some work, especially when it comes to respecting her Nana's possessions. So could you talk a little bit about how she and her Nana navigate through this disagreement that they have and what each of them learns from the other?
Yes, certainly. I do have to acknowledge right off the bat, yes, she is extraordinarily self-aware, and that was almost problematic at first. I think some of the readers were wondering, oh, is this child a little bit too precocious? But I was kind of stubborn about that because the two children on whom this story, or who inspired this story, are both quite precocious and self-aware. So it was genuine. It wasn't just sort of me imposing this on the story. So the conflict, as you said, is it's fairly straightforward on the surface. This little girl takes something that doesn't belong to her, her Nana's precious Matryoshka dolls, and she defaces or refaces them. And her Nana is justifiably upset about this and responds with punishment. So she takes the dolls away, and then she takes dessert away. And I think in real life, too often those kind of conflicts just end there. Maybe the child is in tears, doesn't even have words to describe what's going on inside, or sometimes children try to explain, but adults just aren't ready to hear. It's like, I don't want to hear anymore. So I wanted to show a different way. And I think two things happen. Honest speaking and open-hearted listening. So the first thing is the little girl speaks up, like not in a defensive or a rude way, but because she genuinely wants her Nana to understand why she did what she did. She wasn't being malicious or destructive. She was trying to tell the truth about something. And the uniformity of these dolls just really bothered her. These identical, not only are they all identical, but they're all smiling. And so she knows from her own experience that she's not all smiles from her exterior right to her core all the time. So there's a falseness to the dolls that just bothers her, and she wants to fix it. She wants to make it true. So yeah, so first there's that honesty and the bravery it takes to say that to an adult who's upset with you. But then the other part of it, of course, is her Nana's response. And that is this kind of open-hearted listening, that is listening to understand. Like, as much as the granddaughter wants to be understood, the Nana also wants to understand her granddaughter. And when she does, she can perceive, or rather she can sort of look past the ruined dolls and perceive the motivation behind the action. And that's what makes possible the movement from conflict to understanding and forgiveness and ultimately reconciliation. So that's what happens in the story.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing, like when you see her listening to her granddaughter and not just walking away, like just seeing that, to be able to learn from each other in that way instead of coming to, yeah, you can just imagine that situation not ending like that. So
yeah, and I tried really hard to put a pause in there where we see her kind of going through different facial expressions herself as the emotions are passing through her. Yeah, because often when somebody else is talking, whether it's a child or an adult, we're kind of in our minds figuring out, okay, what's the next thing I'm going to say in response to this? But the grandmother just genuinely listens and gives time and space to absorb what her granddaughter is saying.
Yeah. Yeah. When I just want to say something, when I read it, I was like, like I reacted like the grandmother going, oh my gosh, how are we going to get out of this one? So you handled it really well, because I was irked.
Yeah. I remember we were having a discussion too in the editorial process about, well, there needs to be consequences too, right? Like, so that was kind of a hard thing to surmount with, like, not, you don't really want to punish her. And instead she understood her. So yeah. Okay, so let's move on to the next question. And it's, what surprised you the most during the process of writing these particular books? Because both of you have written quite a few other picture books. And I'm just wondering if you found the process different from other books you worked on, or do you find that you use the same approach for all of your work? And Laura, I thought we'd start with you for this one.
Yeah, that's a really good question, but also a tough one. And I don't have the best answer for it. The process for me is sort of similar each time, but there's always differences. And I think what distinguished this book from some others is how difficult I found it to get into the story. I usually, when I start to write, I always have, I had a professor years ago who said, you need to be able to tell me the nut, the kernel of it was a preaching professor, of your sermon in a sentence. So you can talk for 15 minutes, but you need to tell me in a sentence what it's about. And so I go through a similar process with picture books where I say to myself, okay, what is it that I'm saying? I felt that I had that, but I couldn't find my way into it. And I think that was part of this whole process of just first actively trying on different images, and then finally just sitting back and the inspiration just dropped in my lap from a child. The other thing, though, that made this one a little bit difficult is because I had written so many drafts of it earlier, I was very embedded in this idea of emotion and color, which is interesting, Loretta, because color is such an important part of your story. But in my case, I should have left that behind because I'd moved on to the whole nesting doll image, but I couldn't seem to release it. And I remember, Jennifer, you saying to me, it's got to be pared back. There's too much going on. And yeah, it was an instance of clinging to older ideas that needed to go.
That's tough.
And what about you, Loretta? What was your approach for this book?
Well, this book felt completely different because it didn't follow the same rules that I apply when writing a picture book. You find a problem and you solve that problem. This book came totally out in dialogue, one sentence after another. It was a conversation. And it felt very refreshing, but it also felt really intimate, and that's what I liked. In one of my critique groups, some of my reader friends said, you know, you're going to have trouble with this one. I don't think it'll get published because it's all in dialogue. How would the reader know who is speaking? There aren't enough suggestions for the illustrator. So I did try writing it in first person, and it just didn't work. I just wanted to keep that intimacy, and also it had to be a conversation. Jeffrey needed to be talked through a process to help him solve this problem, because he couldn't have figured it out on his own. And between you, Jennifer, and Lily, you miraculously saw the idea in all its simplicity and ran with it. And I'm so grateful for that.
Yeah, I know I'm surprised to hear that your writing friends didn't take to it right away, because it resonated with me right away. And I know that, well, anyway. So speaking of Lily, maybe we can talk a little bit about the illustration, because it's such a huge part of these. So I thought it would be interesting to hear the two of you talk a little bit about how you felt when you saw the illustrations of your books, like for the very first time, because I know how nerve-wracking and exciting and how many emotions go through that at that point. And I just love the art for both of these books, and they're just incredibly special, and each of them work in perfect harmony with the text. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts. And Loretta, I'll go start with you.
Oh, yeah, sure. I was totally in awe, because you are nervous. You're like, oh no. Also because I'd had comments before of there's no room for the illustrator. But when I first opened it, I was in awe. I felt Lily's illustrations were just perfect. They speak to the simplicity of Jeffrey, of who he is, and also the sweetness of who he is. It seems like Lily got Jeffrey just like you did. And I could tell right away that she understood who Jeffrey was. The illustrations didn't overshadow or complicate the process of the choice that he has to make. They enhance them. Colors are simple and not overpowering. And I'm amazed. Yeah, I like that one. All the shades of blue that Lily found. I'm going to show another one. I love this page where Lily has painted Jeffrey inside of the story. He's in his head. He's in the moment. It's brilliant. He's finishing his paint while he's, you know, just inside his head. I was also blown away by the design of the book. It's obvious Owlkids took so much thoughtful care when making the end pages and the hardcover. The end pages are beautiful. The hardcover under the book, I almost cried when I picked it up. I really feel it's a special book. It's actually a lot bigger than I imagined.
I love that the end papers are blue at the front and then red at the end, because he's decided he's going to embrace red. It's pretty great.
Yeah.
Okay, so Laura, how about you?
Okay, so I have two little stories to relate. And the first is this sense of absolutely delightful surprise I had and it might have been this spread actually, when I saw the little girl and her Nana together for the first time. Jennifer, really early on in the process, you asked me if it was important to me that the dolls specifically be Ukrainian dolls, because I'd said that in the manuscript, because I remember as a child playing with my own grandmother's Ukrainian dolls in Edmonton. My grandma was not Ukrainian, but she'd been given these dolls as a gift. And I said at the time, no, the important point is that they nest. So it doesn't really matter to me where they come from. And then that was the end of that conversation for a while. So I didn't know what Salome was going to do with them. And when I saw the first sketch, they looked like very traditional Matryoshka dolls. So I thought, okay, we're going with a family of Ukrainian background. And then I saw the little girl and her grandmother, and I realized, wow, she's brought a whole other dimension to this story that I hadn't even thought about or considered, by bringing together like multiple backgrounds and cultures and ethnicities. And I love going through the illustrations and just kind of piecing together the family story through little clues, like in the photograph album. And then there are, wedding pictures on the wall, and just these subtle little hints about the wonderful diversity of this family. And as a writer, it didn't occur to me to do that. It's just such a such a vivid example for me of the way the illustrator and the author work not only together, but independently yet together to tell the story in their own way. So that's the first thing. And then the other, there's a phrase in the book when the little girl is describing her emotions, she uses the phrase, a different kind of happy. And when I wrote that, what I had in mind was floating on my back in the ocean, because that's where I feel kind of the most peaceful and content. But that's just me. So I didn't know what Salani Pereira was going to do with this and how she would interpret it. So when I saw the rough, it was the girl lying on her back and she's surrounded by LPs, like vinyl albums. And I thought, yeah, like that totally works, just listening to music. But then when I saw the finished art, I could see the album covers, and one of them was the Broadway cast recording of Camelot. And what are the odds? But when I was 7 or 8 years old, I was obsessed by that album. And I would lie on my parents' living room floor and I would listen to it over and over again until I knew all the songs off by heart. So like I saw it and I could hardly believe it. And it felt like she had sort of magically captured this little piece of my own childhood. And yeah, I love the artwork.
I didn't know that. That's
Oh yeah,
fascinating.
I told I told Salani that story and she thought that was pretty neat.
I bet. And I think that Selene really saw herself in this little girl. I think that she was really, I think that there's a lot of her in this book for sure, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, so the very last question is kind of just a general last thing for you guys to put out into the world. What do you hope that readers will take away from your books? And Laura, I'll start with you.
Okay. From this book specifically, I guess so. Well, that would make sense. I hope that readers go away with a sense of curiosity about their own many faces and also about others. So a kind of self-awareness, but also empathy, like just realizing that there's more to all of us than what appears on the surface. And also maybe to be a little bit more courageous and maybe a more courageous speaker, like speaking truthfully and listening openly, listening for understanding. And I guess the final thing is, if readers went away with a little bit more gentleness, gentleness toward the parts of themselves that we all struggle with, that would be great too.
Beautiful. And how about you, Loretta?
Well said. I felt this kind of picture book would speak to not only children on the spectrum, but all kinds of kids, any child who has difficulty making a decision. I'm hoping Jeffrey Loves Blue will show neurotypical children that making difficult decisions takes time and a lot of thinking, and it's okay to give yourself time and space to work it out. I wish I was given time and space to work out some things when I was young. I'm also hoping that it will help neurotypical children and parents better understand the challenges with kids who are neurodiverse.
Yeah.
So,
and I'm just looking at the Q&A, and there's another question for you, Loretta, about that. It's from Amelia Shearer, and it says, when writing a neurodiverse character, how do you navigate the line between own voices and putting voice to a story you have a personal connection to, but is not your own personal journey of neurodivergence?
Good question. Read it one more time.
Okay. So how do you navigate the line between own voices and putting voice to a story that you have a personal connection to, but that it wasn't your own personal journey?
Right. I was lucky because I have Jeffrey in my life. I have a sister-in-law who works with children with speech. She's a speech pathologist. I could really dig deep into who they were. And I learned so much from Jeffrey. We all learned so much from Jeffrey because we all just take for granted that we know how to do things. And having somebody like Jeffrey, we had to like stop and actually find out how to solve a problem that is easily solvable for us, There are different steps that are taken. So I think learning that, I was kind of putting myself in that situation, that I was also the person learning through Jeffrey's mom and through Jeffrey within the book. I
Yeah,
hope that's a good answer.
I think so.
Okay.
And
So
I have
Barb had a good comment there too, actually.
and I have another question for you, Loretta. It
Yeah.
says, because your story is based on a family member, was there any discussion with the illustrator about reflecting some accuracies related to your nephew's appearance?
I think we talked about this, Jennifer. Yes. When we first saw, Lily's first pictures, he just looked simple. He just looked not simple. There was nothing complex about his clothing or his hair. He just, was easy for children to pick up, I think. And there's a lot of picture books like that that are just too complicated for kids to absorb. Who are on the spectrum, but this one was just, I don't know, I just love the simplicity. Does that?
Yeah, Lily has a knack with just conveying so much with such simple, small details. It's incredible. Yeah,
It really is. And I think you also have a family member or a really good friend
we
who
do. Yeah,
is new. Yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah. I think that's probably why I connected to the story right away as well.
it
'Cause
is. Yeah.
yeah, for sure. Okay, so I think that was all our questions. So thank you so much for joining us, everybody. And you can read and review today's books and more on Edelweiss and NetGalley. And that's our show. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.